and I was working, I believe it was a 3 to 11 shift. 3 to 11 or 4 to midnight. I don't remember what shifts we had in those days, but it was one of the two. And I was notified by radio, taking an ambulance, got to Woodbury. We had a possible fatal out there, and we responded. Leonard Palmer and I, he's retired also, we went out. It was at the Woodbury exit, and there was, of course, fire department and emergency equipment out there to try to. It was terrible, terrible, terrible. The worst I've ever seen accident. Parts of vehicles all over the place. If I'm not mistaken, one motor from one vehicle was about 345 feet away from the car itself, if I'm not mistaken. It was a real high impact accident. After the accident, it was quite a long while we were at the scene of the accident. We brought back, I think, in the ambulance I was in, I think we brought back four kids. And on the one, I believe, the one lady that lived, I think, was a Green Shields girl. And I think they had a blanket on her, and I saw the blanket move, and I went over, and she was still alive. Not covered up, but I mean, I saw the blanket move, so I thought there was nobody alive in that thing until I saw the blanket move. It was a long night, that much I do know. There was a lot of young people out there that night and the following day at the wrecking garage, a lot of young people. And I'm sure a lot of them were out there for their, so to speak, trying to get it through their mind why this happened, you know. Their friends, a lot of those kids were well-liked kids. I mean, they were pretty decent kids. It's the absolute worst traffic accident I've ever seen. I was very hard on young people's driving for quite a while after that. Maybe harder than I should have been. I did not want to see it happen again to any other family. And for quite some time I was pretty hard on young people's driving. And I don't know why. I think that just carried over. You don't want to see it again. And I think all the other officers pretty much did the same. It was pretty traumatic. I know you had some times at night you'd wake up thinking about it. A few nights. And that's to be expected. That's going to happen. That's pretty traumatic. You think about the families of the people quite often. You really do. Because when you go to tell the people, you get to talk to the people. You went to some of the funeral services, you talk to the family members. And they're great people. I mean, they're nice people. You don't want to see it happen to anybody. And for the most part, the families were just very, very good to work with. I mean, the families, the greatest loss you can ever have is losing a loved one, and that was very traumatic. It's pretty traumatic, and for all the friends of those kids and associates, teachers, likewise, church members, whatever, it's going to affect them. So, and that's what happened. It affected the community pretty bad.
Well, it was actually August 31st, right? August 31st, and they were having a going away party for our neighbor. He had graduated from college and he had gotten drafted into the Army, and so he decided two of our neighbor boys were going to have a going away party for him at the VFW Hall in Cleveland. And of course, my sister had graduated from high school and was going to college, and she had this boyfriend. And my younger sister, Mary Luce, and I said, why don't we ask Anita if we can ride with her and Ron to the party? And so we did. And so she asked Ron, and he says, yes, he'd take us. And so we left, went into the party, and it was supposed to be a dance. And they had, everyone who wanted to could bring records. Well, there wasn't much going on, so a couple of my sisters and my friends were going over to Medina. So we drove over to Medina with them, and wasn't much going on in Medina, so we came back. And at that time, my sister said, well, we're going to go to Jamestown to eat. And her boyfriend, Ron, was with his friend Bob Hendricks. And Bob and Ron were rooming together at Valley City State that year. And so Bob had to get a combine part at the bus depot at midnight. It would be in at midnight, and if he picked it up, then he could spend Sunday and Labor Day working in the field with his dad. So we drove into Jamestown, and we stopped at Big Jim's restaurant, and we had supper, or lunch actually, and some of the people that were at the party were there at that time. And we had lunch, went to the bus depot, and picked up the part. And then as we went out of Jamestown, right by the Woodbury interchange, we met an oncoming vehicle. And after that, I don't remember anything except that I remember in the hospital that I tried to get out of my bed, and they said, Irene, where are you going? And I said, I'm looking for my sister. I'm going to go find my sister. And I really think at the time my sister had been at the hospital. And I think what happened is we rode to the hospital together in the same ambulance, so I was aware that my older sister was there with me and that she was alive. And I know they wouldn't let me out, but I had hit the back seat of the passenger side of the car, and so my face was all swollen, so I couldn't see. And so I couldn't, but at the time of the accident, the collision, I couldn't remember anything until I remember trying to get out of my bed. And then my parents, you know, they lived north of Cleveland, so it was early in the morning. In fact, it was like 3 o'clock in the morning before they were notified of the accident. And then they came into the hospital as soon as they made arrangements that my grandparents were coming. And my oldest sister after me was only 11 years old at the time, you know, and so she was in charge of all the other children that were under her. And so they came into the hospital and visited me, and at that time they told me that I had been in an accident, and I said, are Mary Lou and Anita here too? And at the time, my mother said yes, and she says, and they were here because they had brought all the bodies into the funeral home to be identified and so forth. But us three girls didn't have any identification on us, except that my one sister had a letter in her pocket. And that was the only identification that any of us three had. But I do think that they told me afterwards that I had identified my sisters because they asked what color of clothing they were wearing.